Evan, this is a problem for Republicans because this is Donald Trump playing to his the most base instincts he has, and that's a double entendre because of the instincts of his base, and that is birtherism and racism. This is not something mainstream Republicans are interested in, Joe Arpaio and the things that he has stood for.
Yeah, the only person celebrating this in Arizona is Chemtrail Kelly Ward, and she's saying this is the greatest thing. You have John McCain and Jeff Flake who came out. Speaker Ryan even came out and said this is wrong. Republicans believe in law and order, and part of that is if you are told by a federal court to stop doing something and you don't, and you are held in contempt, then you actually have to listen to the judge and you earn those consequences. The president just said that doesn't matter. But look at the bigger picture of what's going on here. Look who he likes in law enforcement. It's Joe Arpaio. It's Sheriff Clark. Both of them have had wrongful death suits.
He tweeted this morning about Sheriff Clark to buy and read Sheriff Clark's book.
Well, Sheriff Clark's book is about as educational as a coloring book right now. Because look at what he did as sheriff. You have some people dying in his custody because they denied the person water for 7 days. And when Donald Trump goes out and he goes on Long Island and talks about roughing up suspects, that's his view. You can violate people's civil liberties. You can rough up suspects. You can racially profile like Sheriff Arpaio did. Heck, I partially believe that Donald Trump will take a play or a page out of Arpaio's playbook and fake something. Remember, Sheriff Arpaio faked an assassination attempt against himself and tried to frame an ex-con for it? This sends a terrible signal, and I'm glad Republicans are standing up and saying this is wrong.
As a Republican, because this is a Republican fight for the moment, because they can't get it done without Democratic help, and no Democrat is going to vote for anything that looks remotely like funding a border wall. According to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, answering questions about this wall, she says the president's, no pun intended, prepared to go to the wall about this. Actually, let's play that very quickly. Let's hear from Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
This is something the president's committed to. He's committed to protecting American lives, and doing that through the border wall is something that's important. It's a priority, and we're moving forward with it.
But he's not saying that Mexico is going to pay for it.
He hasn't said they're not either.
Which was definitely the highlight of that press conference for me. He's not said they're not either. Mexico's made it very clear they're not paying for it. He started talking about NAFTA now, so that's the way that the president wants Mexico to pay for this. But nobody wants to get involved in this stuff. This president doesn't have enough in his pocket, enough successes to make this push.
Well, let's look at it this way. The president is so obsessed with the wall, he's willing to cut off his nose to spite his face. If he is really serious about having a government shutdown over it, it's going to tarnish Republicans, especially in the midterms. And the economy is going to go south. And that's the one thing Trump has going for him right now. Now, let's actually look at the wall itself and what nobody's talking about. You could have $1 trillion from Republicans and Democrats authorized, but still you need to use eminent domain to seize the public land to get there. Texas has a 1,254-mile border with Mexico, and only 100 miles of that is public land. So that's 1,154 miles you're going to have to pay for just to get the land to build the wall.
And
that's
the Constitution says, in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, it is that you have to pay people fairly for whatever you take. And
for the Border Fence Act, which was passed in 2006, it actually went out, and we're still seeing litigation to this day for just 700 miles of the almost 2,000-mile border.
Hundreds of lawsuits.
Yes, and we're talking about things that are as wide as a sidewalk to giant ranches. And then when you look at what happened with the fence, there are Texas ranchers who had gates built by the government, and now they regret it because it's on their land, and in order to get to their cattle, which are grazing, they, as they say, have to ask the government permission to go on their own land. And it's a boondoggle. The president needs to give it up.
On Fox this morning, I just want to ask our control room if we have this. Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, was asked by Chris Wallace about whom Trump represents. And I'll get that for you once I have it. But Rex Tillerson said Donald Trump speaks for himself. Now, Rex Tillerson has not been a longstanding participant in the Republican Party, but it is something I'm sure a lot of Republicans heard this morning and probably want to start repeating, because they don't need the problems that the Republican Party already has being made continuously worse by this president.
Well, let's look at what's going on. The president is isolated, he's impotent, he has an overblown sense of grievance, and he's starting to lash out, as we've seen over the past few weeks. Congressional Republicans actually started moving away from his policy agenda in July and just ignoring requests from the White House to put things in legislation, which doesn't happen this early for any president. And now we're seeing them distance themselves on Arpaio, on the wall and the debt ceiling game of chicken that the president wants to play. You're seeing more and more Republicans be emboldened and say things publicly that they've been thinking privately. So Republicans are trying to move away from him, while the president has never identified as one. Sure. It's always they. It's never we. He's attacking Mitch McConnell, who arguably is the most important person in Washington that Donald Trump needs on his side for A, passing any sort of legislation, and B, if the Mueller probe results in some sort of chart or articles of impeachment, it's
he's going to need the firewall of Mitch McConnell.
And Mitch McConnell's going to be like, yeah, bye, Felicia. And I think that Republicans do recognize that there is a problem in that Trump is becoming the way that, or the prism in which we are viewed.
Right. Evan, this is an interesting point because a number of the president's so-called globalist or Democrat advisors, as Breitbart calls them, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, and Gary Cohn, the chief economic advisor, have come under a lot of pressure to rebuke the president or to resign. In fact, Mnuchin, 300 of his Yale fellow graduates wrote a letter to him, and he responded with a fairly defensive position about this thing, starting with the, I don't know why I have to defend the president. Gary Cohn got a lot of ink on Friday for a much more reasoned response about why he thinks it's important to be in the service of the American people and stay in that White House, and that the White House has to do more on these things. But to Kareen's point, a lot of people say, why don't you just leave?
Well, I think every cabinet secretary has to take a gut check and say, am I here for the right reasons? We know that Secretary Mattis, General Dunford, McMaster, and John Kelly are there to try and keep the president from breaking the world. They aren't exactly the biggest fans of his, but they have a patriotic sense of duty. Whereas Gary Cohn, he wants to be Fed chair when Janet Yellen's term is up.
Right, and that's not the same as saving the world.
No, that's advancing your own career and an agenda. But I think there are congressional Republicans who are stepping up. But the thing that has troubled me is when Jeff Flake stood up, his approval rating dropped 18 points, and Democrats attacked him for standing up, because to them, standing up is also meaning voting Democratic Party line on issues. And Jeff Flake went out and said, it's about morals, not about policy, that I'm standing up with the president.